Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Criminology. This is going to be our Week 5 lecture. This is Chapter 6 out of your textbook. It's entitled Psychological and Psychiatric Foundations of Criminal Behavior. Again, text by Frank Smaliger, PowerPoint presentation created by Ellen G. Cohn, Ph.D. You should have available to you the complete slide set that I have here. And so go along with me, and of course your textbook being the ebook. If you can, it would be helpful if you did it in a split screen. I was going to try to do this recording in the split screen this week, but I think the text would probably be too small to read anyway. So there's a lot to this particular chapter, a lot of different ideas, different ways that we've looked at causes of crime from a psychological and psychiatric perspective. So I'm going to gloss over some pieces and go into more detail with others. I would strongly suggest that you look at each of the things that are in the slide deck, assume that they're fairly important, and go into your textbook and read those sections, understand what that's about, highlight those sections. You can also share my highlights. I will make sure that gets done today. I went through this chapter a little bit and started highlighting some things. I had done some other chapters in the previous course, so my highlights are available to you as well. Try to highlight those things that you're going to see later on your final exam, or things that are going to be important with you later. There are some things in here that I will highlight because they will have to do with your homework or with your project, so make sure that you follow along. Hopefully you can see me in the bottom of your screen. It should be the bottom right corner. Unfortunately, the way I have this set up, I can't see myself while I'm doing the slide deck. So this is another piece of software that I'm trying out. Hopefully it works for all of us, so we get the best of both worlds. You can see the slides and you can see me here as well. So I'm going to assume that it looks good, because it did when I started. So first of all, if I start off with some key terms with regard to psychology and psychiatry in criminal justice. Forensic psychology, and the definition is right there. I probably shouldn't read it to you. But basically, it's using science and the profession of psychology to answer questions with regard to law and the legal system, where psychiatry is a subspecialty of medicine. And you're going to look at psychiatry with regard to crime prevention, solution, criminal rehabilitation, issues of criminal law. So understand the difference. Psychology is a science in and of itself, which uses psychology, counselors, those types of folks, to help understand why people commit crimes. But psychiatry is a medical specialty, so understand that from a psychiatric point of view, there might be actually some issues or problems within the brain that could be addressed through medicine or surgery or something like that. We did talk earlier about the guy that had the tumor in his brain, and remove the tumor, remove the problem. Remember, I talked about this book by Adrian Rain, and strongly suggest that if you have even a little bit of interest in criminology, you'll be fascinated by what he has in this book and how he ties everything together, from psychology, psychiatry, even social structure and social environmental stuff, how it all ties together, where some people will become criminals and others will not. So it's really, really good stuff. And you did see the interview with him in class last week, so I would strongly suggest it. So you look in your textbook. Hopefully the pages are the same as in mine, because I'm using the paper version, as you can see. But at page 211, you see the learning outcomes. Tells you what you should expect as you're going through the chapter. The major principles of psychological theories, as you can see. The individual. We're looking at a person. Not looking at globally what's going on all over the world that's going to be the cause of crime. We're looking at the individual. Who is that one person? See my little thing? So the individual is the primary unit of our analysis. Personality, and this is another tool I'm just getting used to. Personality is the major motivational element within individuals. Crimes result from when there's issues with that, when someone is acting abnormally, dysfunctional, inappropriate mental processes within the personality. Psychological theories believe that that's the cause of crime. Criminal behavior might have a purpose for the person, as in that it's going to address some needs that they have. So you may look at them and say, that makes absolutely no sense. But because of their psychological perspective, it meets their needs. Now keep in mind that society defines what's normal for a person. So there's an interesting story I recall from the movie Serpico, where they talked about a king, and the king was running his community, his society, and he had a lot of problems with the people. The problem with the people were they were drinking water from a poisoned well, and it made them all have some psychological and psychiatric issues. But the majority of society were the ones that were drinking from the well, and the king was all by himself in his castle thinking, hey, what's wrong with my people? And then one day the king drank from the well, and everybody cheered the next day because the king had regained his senses. And what that tells us is that what's normal is defined by the consensus of the society as a whole. Now, how we get the problems that people have with psychiatry and psychology come from a variety of causes, as we've already discussed a little bit. Some of them might be reaction to the environment that they're in that causes psychological issues, and some of them might be that psychiatric, mental issues that's medically based because there's problems within the brain, whether it's the enzymes in the brain, whether it's a tumor in the brain, all kinds of different things. So there's going to be a variety of different aspects of theory that we're going to be looking at. First one being psychiatric criminology or forensic psychology, and it basically looks at the fact that there's drives and motives that are deep within the person's personality that determine their behavior. The concepts we look at, psychopath, sociopath, you've heard these terms before, antisocial and asocial personality, which are all basically different names for the same idea. It's changed, over the years, it has moved forward. There's been different definitions, different requirements as far as, what is a sociopath, what's a psychopath, antisocial or asocial. It's been refined, and the more common terms to use today is the antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD, as we shall see. So in psychological theories, you had two main threads. One is conditioning. It's basically people learn based upon reward or punishment. So people are conditioned to do things. So if every day at your house at 6 o'clock your mom rang a bell and you got fed, then you got used to that time of day being the time that it was time to eat. And maybe you showed up at the door ready to eat even before mom rang the bell. Or for some of us, I don't know, some of you come to class late so you might not understand this, but if you're so used to getting up at a certain time of day because your alarm always goes off at 7 o'clock, there may be days when you actually wake up just before the alarm because your body has been conditioned by that constant response. Now, you might have heard of a guy, maybe in high school, if you studied psychology at all, a guy named Pavlov. He had a bunch of dogs, and he did a little experiment with those dogs. And basically, he rang a bell and fed them. And what happened is when they put the food in front of them, they would salivate because they'd see the food, and their digestive tract would be saying, hey, food, we got to be ready to process this food. And he just kept doing this, and eventually it got to the point where he would ring the bell and the dogs would salivate even though there was no food in front of them. So that was the concept of they're being conditioned by that reward. People also may be conditioned by punishment or negative things that happen to them as a result of something that they did. Did your parents, when I was growing up, it was okay for parents to use like a belt or a stick or something to paddle you or to spank you, if you will. Now, of course, our society has changed a little bit where that type of corporal punishment is no longer accepted. But there's still people that do it and believe that it's helpful, where people will know that, well, if that's going to happen to me, I don't want that to happen to me, so I'm not going to do it. Kind of the idea that we've talked about before with regard to deterrence. If somebody knows that they're going to spend a certain amount of time in prison, then maybe they're going to be conditioned not to do it. The other main thread in psychological theory is that there are personality disturbances or diseases in the mind. All right, there's more terms. Psychopath. Psychopathy is a personality disorder. It basically means the person has antisocial behavior and lack of affect. Lack of affect basically means, really no personality, or they're not concerned about a lot of things. I shouldn't say no personality, because there's some psychopaths, like say Ted Bundy, who was a very affable person, got along really well with a lot of people. They thought he was a wonderful guy, but then he could kill you and not give a crap about it. Psychopath or sociopath is an individual that has a personality disorder, manifested in aggressively antisocial behavior and lacking in empathy. So again, this is a person who could kill you and not be concerned about you or your family or anybody else. All right, a guy named Cleckley wrote a book called The Mask of Sanity, and he suggested that the person with a psychopathic personality, and keep in mind, Cleckley was the first one to actually develop this concept of the psychopathic personality. And what he said was the psychopath was a moral idiot. Now, the concept of an idiot is somebody, most people would think of somebody lacking in their mental capacity. Well, when he says a psychopath is a moral idiot, it means they're lacking in their moral capacity. Their morals and ethics are basically not there. There's a poverty of affect. So they can't imagine how other persons would feel. So they don't have the empathy. So, they could see somebody hit by a truck and be like, wow, somebody got hit by a truck, big deal. Where others would be screaming, oh my God, what happened? And there's a vast difference there. All right, these are some of the characteristics. I'm not going to read every single one of them to you, but take a look. As I said, Ted Bundy, superficial charm and good intelligence. He was a very smart guy, and he got along with everybody. You look at the other ones, absence of delusions, which means they're not like a person we're going to look at later on that has some kind of mental issues where they're deluded and think that the Martians are out to get them, or there's some crazy thing going on and they have to kill people to protect themselves. No, they're not nervous. They don't feel guilt or shame. Generally not reliable, good at lying and chronically lying, ongoing antisocial behavior, poor judgment, and you see the rest. And you could probably look at people like Ted Bundy and some other people that have been diagnosed as psychopaths, and you can clearly see it. We'll look a little closer at Ted in class. All right, antisocial or asocial personality. As I said, as science or psychology and psychiatry looked at these things a little bit further, basically the titles change. If you look in your book in the explanation of what antisocial or asocial personality is, it's basically an extension of the sociopath, psychopath idea. So here we have people that are not socialized. A behavior pattern brings them into repeated contact with society, so they're antisocial, having problems with society. Antisocial personality, suffering from antisocial personality disorder. But again, according to the American Psychiatric Association and I believe the Psychological Association does the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. The current diagnosis of someone who is a sociopath or psychopath is antisocial personality disorder. Some causes, somatic causes are things that are based within the body, physiological features. So maybe your central nervous system malfunctions. Psychogenic causes are those that came from the environment that you're in, your relationships that you had in your life. Were you able to form attachments with mom or dad or other family members? Were you separated from mom earlier in life, which then caused you to become antisocial? Some other forms of early insecurity that might have caused this. So it could be either medically or psychologically in the brain based, or caused by the environment that you grew up in. All right, personality types. Eisnick studied Crime and Personality, 1964. He said crime was the result of personality characteristics, namely that he said there were three types of personalities: the psychotics, which were the most likely ones to be criminal; extroverts, which some of you may be, the people are always looking out and reaching out for people and talking to people; neurotics, or people that had some minor disability, minor personality faults, but generally are not dangerous, but could be. Psychiatric criminology is, studying all the drives and motives that operate within the personality that could determine your behavior. Could be biological and psychological urges that come through your consciousness, and they're not really too concerned about the external environment. So when you're talking about psychiatric criminology, they're looking at the medical causes. Psychoanalytic, if you've ever heard of a guy named Sigmund Freud is the father of psychoanalysis, and basically his belief was that personality was the main cause of your behavior, and that deviant behavior came from dysfunctional personalities, and that started back in the 20s. People still study this way, and there's various concepts that go along with it. You may have heard of the id, you may have heard of the ego, superego. Another interesting concept is sublimation. Psychotherapy is how we treat those people. Thanatos is a death wish. Neurosis, like I said, a minor illness. Psychosis is a major illness. Schizophrenia is a very specific type of psychological illness that we'll look at in class. All right, so psychoanalysis is basically the study of people. So they think that criminal behavior is a maladaptive issue. Your brain hasn't properly adapted. You don't know how to deal with situations, but it's because of some inherent inadequacy in your personality. Psychotherapy is how we treat those people. Somebody has a mental disorder, they apply what they call psychoanalytic principles and techniques to help treat them. Now, this really cool pyramid chart shows you what the id, the ego, and the superego are. And very simple when you look at it. Oh, my chart was using my pen and it jumped on me. So anyway, when you look at it, at the very bottom, you have the id. And again, I'm learning to do this. The next one is your ego. Next one being the superego. Okay? So the id is our basic desires, the basic things that we want, without thinking of how we're going to get it, what the consequences are if we get it in an inappropriate way. The id is like, I want what I want it now, and I'm going to get it. And some crime, if you're looking at it in a psychoanalytic way, is based upon people who just want what they want, and their ego and superego aren't developed enough to tell them to stop. The next level is the ego. The ego is more practical. The ego looks at reality of the situation. Like, okay, I really, really want a Slurpee from the 7-Eleven. I don't have any money, but I have a gun. So maybe I should go in and stick up the 7-Eleven. I'll get a little money, and I'll get my Slurpee. Well, the reality of that situation is it's probably not worth it. So somebody with a fairly well-developed ego is going to say, hey, you know what? Ripping off a Slurpee and maybe getting myself locked up for robbery, not a good idea. Now, certainly we know people make that decision and go ahead and do it every day. But someone who's really looking at it, the ego is basically where that weighing is going to be. We talked about it before, where people that are making a conscious decision, if they have a good developed ego, it's going to be easier for them to say, well, this is what I want, but some bad things are going to happen if I get it this way. Maybe I got to come up with a better way to get it. And then your superego at the top of the pyramid, that's where your conscience is at. That's where you're looking at ethics, you're looking at values. So you're going to say, hey, I really want a Slurpee, and I could go in and rip it off, but that would be wrong. See the difference here? The id is like, I want it, I'm going to get it however I get it without thinking of consequences. Ego is more practical. It's not like they really care whether it's right or wrong, but they're looking at it from a practical aspect. Where the superego, you're looking at it and say, well, you know what? It's not right for me to take it. Just take it that way. Another thing in psychoanalytic perspective is called sublimation. Sublimation is where someone actually replaces one item with another in their consciousness. And the definition doesn't really help. If you look in the book, there's a really great explanation in the book. But an example would be, and the example in the book is similar to this, that if, let's say, you really, really dislike your boss at work, but you feel powerless to do anything about your boss. So then you go out with your friends and you basically beat on your friends because you can't beat on your boss, so you beat on somebody else. In criminal terms, there's some serial killers who it's been suggested that maybe they hated their mothers. Like if you remember the film Psycho, the idea there is the guy hated his mother, and so women came to the hotel and he would kill them. And there's plenty of real life serial killers that we'll look at specifically in class that had this same issue, where they basically replaced their mom, their spouse, whatever, who they couldn't do anything to, or maybe wasn't there anymore, but they still had this deep-seated hatred and wanted to do something to them, replaced them with other people. So that's why you might see some serial killers are always picking people that look the same. And if you look at the person, a picture of somebody in their past, that, oh wow, all of his victims look exactly like his ex-wife. That's sublimation. Thanatos is when somebody has a death instinct or death wish. So basically, they have this death instinct, so they're not really concerned about what happens. So they're more willing to take risks, is what it amounts to. So even though you have the id, the ego, and the superego, somebody who suffers from this thanatos or death wish could take the chance of going in with a gun to the 7-Eleven because they don't really give a crap. If the clerk pulls a gun on me and shoots me, so what? That's the death wish. Neurosis are just people who might have some mild problems where they're not always normal. They're in touch with reality, but they're anxious or fearful. It might be someone who has that need to wash their hands all the time, like every time they touch something. Some of you might suffer from some very mild neuroses, not to say that you're all sick in the head, but we all have something that we're used to doing, and some might get to the level of being considered a neurosis. Most of them don't have anything to do with crime, but occasionally some might. All right, a psychotic offender. Psychosis, we said, was a serious mental illness. Psychotic individuals have a distorted concept of reality. They sometimes have inappropriate moods and mood swings. They don't get along with others, and sometimes have difficulty caring for themselves. One type might be a schizophrenic and paranoid schizophrenic. I have a really good video, and there's a book that I have as well that would be a good read. And you got this paranoid schizophrenic, and believe it or not, her twin sister happens to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist, one or the other. And they basically grew up together and eventually, parted at some point, but it's very, very interesting. And I'm going to show you an interview with her. Pretty cool stuff. Frustration aggression theory. You may very well be familiar with this. You get really frustrated. Some of us, when we get frustrated, we get aggressive. Or you hear about road rage incidents where somebody gets frustrated with being cut off on a highway and they chase somebody down and shoot them, or they chase somebody down or beat them with the baseball bat they had in the car. Frustration aggression is kind of like that, where people, they might displace their anger towards somebody else. Say you had a really bad day at work, you go home and kick the dog. That's displacement. So all these things are surround frustration aggression theory. I hope you can see me because the lights just went off in the room. Let's pause this. Do I want to keep my uh-oh. Hope I didn't screw this up. All right. And would you like to continue recording? All right, here we go. No? All right, this is interesting because didn't bring it up full screen. I hope I'm still doing this. Well, we'll see later. All right, so Freud said aggression is a natural response to our frustrating limits. Dollard had a whole frustration aggression theory, that when we are really frustrated, that the most likely consequences that we're going to have direct aggression, we're going to attack something. Could be manifested in socially acceptable ways, like playing a sport, boxing, going down into your basement and beating the bag, those kind of things you can do. Or it could be a criminal act where you actually attack someone out of your frustration. Adaptive behavior, you have alloplastic and autoplastic adaptation. In alloplastic, crime reduces the stress that the individual faces by producing changes in the environment. So the criminal will do things that change what's going on around them, where autoplastic is the person adapts by changing their value systems. Modeling theory, and this is basically people learn to behave, they model themselves after others. If I observe somebody, there's talk about violent video games, the violence in a neighborhood, people imitate each other, they interact with each other, and usually modeling theory, as we'll see, people tend to model someone that's at a higher level than them. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a teacher, an older brother, sibling, somebody who is a celebrity. We model after those people. Gabriel Tard, pay close attention here. We have two guys, Tard and Bandura, who are the subject of your homework assignment. You're going to need to compare the theories of these two people and answer a few questions as well. So Tard has 3 laws with regard to imitation and suggestion. That people in close contact imitate each other's behavior. Again, imitation moves from the top down, so you're more likely to imitate somebody who's at a higher level than you. And when we behave, the new acts of behavior are either going to reinforce, make those more powerful, or replace our old types of behavior. Bandura basically said everyone is capable of aggression, but we have to learn how to do it. So we don't come out of the womb being aggressive, according to Bandura, but we're all capable of it, but we're going to learn it. And Bandura had some really good studies he did, and I have some videos that relate to Bandura. Really interesting stuff, which we'll get into. Social learning factors determine what forms of aggressive behavior that the aggressive behavior takes, how often, and when it happens, and the targets. And basically, we learn to act. The basic premise is we learn to act by observing others. It can be activated or provoked in various ways. Disengagement is a concept that people who devalue aggression may engage in it by basically rationalizing. So they think aggression's not good, but they can make themselves feel better about it by blaming the victim, taking away the human qualities of the victim, vindication of the aggression by legitimate authorities, or because they're constantly exposed to it, like violent video games, like seeing the violence in the neighborhood all the time, they may become desensitized over time. Behavior theory, again, this has to do with reward and punishment. Go back to, we talked about Pavlov a little while ago. Individual behavior is rewarded, will increase. That which is punished will decrease. And the concept operant behavior, conditioning, stimulus response, reward, punishment which is exactly what I said with regard to the story about the dogs and ringing the bell and getting food at the same time and salivating, and eventually they salivated to just the bell. That's operant conditioning. All right, behavior theory, we have the stimulus response approach, like I said, bell causes their response. They learned it because they got the food at the same time. They responded initially to the food, but then they learned to respond to the bell. And this is one of the things that in your psychology class, which you're going to have to take later on, you'll get into this in much deeper than we're going to get into it here. So the basic concept, when behavior results in reward, it's likely that it'll become more frequent. If you're going to get a candy bar every time you do your student survey, well, maybe you're more likely to do it. If you're going to get with regard to students, if you're going to get an A every time you do your homework and you do it well, then you're more likely to do it well. If you get a poor grade when you hand in junk, then maybe that punishment you won't do it as much. That's the concept. Now, whether it works or not, kind of when we were talking about classical theory, this concept depends upon people actually thinking about it. But the idea of behavior theory is sometimes, if you learn it well enough, you don't think about it, you just do it. Again, rewards increase the frequency of behavior. Now, this is a concept that people usually have trouble with, the concept of rewards and punishment, and positive and negative. When we're thinking about positive and negative in this particular item, we're not talking about something good or bad. Positive, negative, think about math. Positive means we add something, negative means we take something away. So if we have a positive reward, that means that we're adding something that someone likes. So, those of you that have kids, your child behaves really well, you give them some ice cream. That's a positive reward. Negative rewards is when we take away something distressful. So maybe if your older child has to do chores at home and they did really good on the report card, you say, okay, you don't have to do the chores this week. We'll make daddy do them. Where punishments is generally think about in a negative connotation. But again, positive and negative, we're talking about adding something or taking something away. So positive punishment is when we add something undesirable. So maybe that is a spanking, maybe it's just scolding them, something that we added into the mix. Negative punishment is when we take away something from them that they wanted. Maybe we take away their access to their video games for a couple of days in order to get the message across. So understand that concept, that positive is adding something, negative is taking something away. So you can have positive rewards and you can have positive punishments. Don't think of it as good or bad. Think of it as adding and subtracting. Attachment theory. There are those that believe that our behavior is a result of the attachments that we formed as children. So most of us, hopefully, we've had secure attachment, a healthy form of attachment. We got along well with our parents, our mothers. We had a good relationship. But two that possibly lead to crime are anxious avoidant attachment and anxious resistant attachment, is where, because we did not have good relationships, either because maybe we lost a parent at an early age, maybe we were molested, something happened in our early years where we did not form this strong attachment to significant people in our lives. So look at page 236, very simple thing. I actually highlighted it in my book. According to attachment theory, delinquent behavior arises whenever non-secure attachments are created. Anxious avoidant attachment, for example, develops when children feel rejection and develop a lack of confidence concerning parental support and care. Anxious resistant attachment develops from similar experiences and results in feelings of uncertainty, which cause the child and later the adult to feel anxious, to become fearful of his or her environment, and to cling to potential caregivers or partners. So those two are believed to lead to crime in some respects. Now, certainly, as we know, if we can identify people that have these issues, maybe we can help them and treat them through some type of counseling. It's those that are not identified and not treated that could be the ones that wind up in our prison systems or wind up, whatever, doing something really bad in a society. Self-control theory. Self-control theory is basically the idea that people have the ability to control their own behavior. And that the root cause of crime is my inability to exercise socially appropriate controls over myself. All right. Self-control is defined as a person's ability to alter his or her own states and responses. There are 4 types, and I believe this is in your homework assignment as well, so pay attention, or look it up in your book and highlight it. It's on page 236. But you have impulse control. So I see something I want, I got the urge, I have control. And I say, okay, no, I can't just take that. That's impulse control. Control over what's going on in your mind, that's control over the contents of the mind. Control over your emotional and mood states. Some of us, maybe you were involved in a fight before you came to school. Control over your emotional and mood states is you don't bring that problem into the classroom. And performance control is the ability to control our bodies. The best example of performance control is a high level of athlete who can control the way the body moves. Even when they're in the middle of, they're flying through the air, they can control what's going on with their bodies. Gottfriedson and Hervey, they developed something called a general theory of crime, and they felt that low self-control was the primary cause of crime, individual level, and self-control was how the person could control that, or the degree to which the person is vulnerable to temptations of the moment. Now this one's pretty important, especially for those of you who are going to be practitioners in the field of criminal justice. Maybe the psychological theories don't mean much to you, although they probably should, because if you're going to be a police officer, corrections officer, whatever, you're going to run into people with these issues. But those of you, I know that there's some people that want to go even further in the system, or you're going to want to know about this at least. Insanity in the law. We hear about people who are going to plead that they're mentally ill at the time of the crime, and therefore they shouldn't be held responsible. What does that mean? Well, insanity is a legal definition. It's when we establish the inability to understand right from wrong or to conform one's behavior to the requirements of law. That's the legal insanity. Psychological, when we look at insanity, is when somebody has a persistent mental disorder or derangement. It's important to know the difference, because legal insanity could get you off from the crime. Psychological insanity, not necessarily, because there's lots of people that have mental disorders but still understand what's right and wrong. So know that it's legal insanity that we're really concerned with as far as the criminal justice system. There's lots of court cases. Fuchsia versus Louisiana. There's the law, Insanity Defense Reform Act. There's the concept of someone being not guilty by reason of insanity. There are different ways that we look at being not guilty by reason of insanity in our society. And it's important to know them. If you're going to work in Pennsylvania or New Jersey, the one at the top of the list is the one you need to be concerned with, the McNaughton Rule. McNaughton Rule basically says that individuals cannot be held criminally responsible for their actions if, at the time of the offense, either 1, they did not know what they were doing, or 2, they did not know what they were doing was wrong. One or the other. That's the McNaughton Rule. Others, irresistible impulse is basically the person couldn't control themselves. It's okay, go back to control theory. There was an irresistible impulse. This person had no way to control themselves. You know the commercial. I think it's Doritos. You can't eat just one. Irresistible impulse. Once you eat one, you're going to eat them. You're going to eat the whole package. All right. Durham Rule is somebody's not criminally responsible if the act was the product of a mental disease or defect. That's a little simpler. McNaughton Rule is more difficult. If you can justify that the person had a mental disease or defect, it's possible to get them off under the Durham Rule. But if you can actually look up, I thought it was in the book, but it's not in the book and it's not in the slide deck. But there is a chart I believe that we showed it in Intro to Criminal Justice that says what states use which rule. Substantial capacity test basically looks at mental capacity to understand the wrongfulness of their act, to conform their behavior to the requirements of law. It's similar to McNaughton, but McNaughton is much deeper in its scope. Brawner rule basically tells the jury they got to figure it out. Delegates responsibility to the jury to determine what constitutes insanity, which to me sounds like really there's no rule. It's like, well, the jury can decide whether this person was insane or not, with no guidance whatsoever. Guilty but mentally ill is when basically guilty but mentally ill is fairly simple. Guilty but mentally ill is that when we look at the requirements for the crime, what are the elements of the crime? They committed every element of the crime. Everything is there and proven beyond a reasonable doubt. But maybe they still had a mental illness at the time of the crime, but they're not legally insane. So remember the McNaughton rule. So you have someone like Ted Bundy is a good example, and there's several other people out there. In your textbook, they talk about DuPont, they talk about Andrea Yates. I mean, there's different people that are addressed that had some severe mental illnesses, but they still were determined to be guilty because they did understand what they were doing. They knew what they were doing is wrong, or they did know what they were doing. That's guilty but mentally ill. You say, well, the person's sick in the head, basically. They need treatment, but they knew exactly what they're doing. So they're going to get treated, they're going to get treatment, but they're still going to wind up staying incarcerated. Where the opposite is true, if we're not guilty by reason of insanity, those people are found not guilty, so they're not sent to prison. But if they are still a danger to society, they may wind up in some kind of forensic psychiatric center or someplace where they're going to get treatment, and they're going to get released whenever the director of that facility deems that they're safe. That's the basic difference. All right, there's federal provisions, not guilty by reason of insanity. Basically, these were changed after President Reagan was shot back in the 80s, and it requires that the person has psychological or psychiatric examination and a hearing. Individual was committed if the release creates a risk to persons or property due to present mental illness or defect. Discharge when the facility director determines she or he has recovered from mental disease or defect. These are the guidelines under the federal statute. All right, so let's look at social policy now. What social policy can we develop based upon these psychological and psychiatric theories? Well, again, know that these psychological theories continue to evolve. You know, the field of psychology is constantly changing. There's new theories come out, there's new ideas come out, new standards come out. They just recently changed the DSM. I think they're in the DSM-5. They just changed it like 2 years ago. So there's different diagnoses for issues that people might have. And some of these are related to crime. So one of the things that we try to do, or an idea as far as social policy, is let's take a closer look at the person, look at their past behavior. How dangerous are they? Identify personal characteristics to predict their future dangerousness. And there's a great whole set of videos, and we'll definitely be showing you one or two of them in the course of the class, where there was this doctor, I think his name is Stone, who developed a scale of dangerousness. And he'll take these different people and he'll talk about their psychological issues and put them on this scale of dangerousness, which would then tell us, well, should this person be released into society or not? And that's on his scale. Forensic psychology, again, social policy. Selective incapacitation is if you can identify someone who's a career criminal, maybe you decide to selectively incapacitate. Remember, incapacitation means that we take them out of the mix, so we can incarcerate this person. If they're deemed to be very dangerous, maybe we put them away. That's selective incapacitation. Correctional psychology is basically what's done within the prison system. When we have people coming in, we know they have mental illness or issues, then we got to diagnose these people, we got to classify them, we got to provide them with the proper treatment and hopefully rehabilitation so that maybe they're going to be a little bit better with their mental issues when they leave the prison system than when they came in. Social policy and the psychology of criminal conduct. Certainly there's people that look at these, like Andrews and Bonta. They said that practical synthesis of psychological approaches to criminal behavior, we should look at these things and kind of see how they work together. Andrews and Bonta didn't come up with new theories. They just called for, hey, let's look at what we've come up with so far and see that we make sure that we understand what we have come up with so far. And let's take a look at what actually works when we're going to try to treat somebody. We want to look at what works, not necessarily what's convenient at the time. And remember, we've talked about how the people in our government might jump for something convenient without knowing for sure whether it's actually going to work. I just read an article. It's in New York Magazine. I'm going to share it with you in class, which talks about the release of over 6,000 federal prisoners that are going to come out. There's not been a study to know what's going to happen with those people. Now, the federal government hopefully is going to follow these people and see if they reoffend and see what the recidivism rates are for those people and all that kind of thing. But we don't know yet. So this is going to be an untested thing where all of a sudden, okay, well, these people are nonviolent offenders. Let's let them out, see what happens. And could the crime rate go up? Yes. Could the crime rate not go up? Yes. Could all these people become good people? Yes. Is it likely? No. Certainly somebody's going to commit a crime. And, of course, somebody else is going to say, well, see, I told you. Just like I think we discussed in another class how New Jersey used to have a law where there was a mandatory release of all prisoners in the state prison system 6 months prior to their normal release date. And this was so that they could be supervised in the community and get back on their feet. Well, when two guys went and committed murder as a result of their or during their early release time, people all of a sudden said, see, you let those guys out. They committed murder. You should have left them inside. That's going to happen too. But there were like 400 people released in this program. 2 guys committed murder. It looks like it worked out for the most part. But unfortunately, when that came out that these 2 guys committed murder, New Jersey's governor got all over it, said, oh, this is crazy, it's ridiculous, even though he knew about it already. Now, when it became public, a push to have that law changed, and it was changed. So that program no longer exists. But was it based upon any kind of scientific methodology? Probably not. It was based upon, oh my God, look what happened, let's change the law. Well, basically Andrews and Bonta say, hey, let's look at what's out there, let's look at what works, and let's base our policy going forward on what we know works. Psychological profiling. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard about psychological profiling. The FBI has their profilers. I know some people, when they've come into this program, have told me, oh yeah, I want to be a criminal profiler. And that's basically the idea of trying to understand, predict behavior of certain types of offenders. It's very difficult to do. The FBI profilers, basically they get cases that are in existence and try to understand the type of person, maybe come up with a profile of the person. So it goes both ways. It's either trying to predict behavior or looking at crimes that have occurred. If you have, say, a serial rape, serial murder, whatever, you look at what's going on and you come up with a profile to help the police look for this person. So, all right, so that's the end of this particular slide deck. I hope it didn't take too long, and I hope everything worked. I'm going to go back and watch it now to make sure. But let me know what you thought of this particular way of presenting. Again, for the most part, until I stopped it for a moment, it was displaying the slideshow in full screen, so I couldn't see myself. Now it's displaying the slideshow in a smaller screen, and I see myself in the background, so I can see what we're looking at. But anyway, I'm going to give you that New York Magazine article in Friday's class, and one of 2 things we're going to do. We're going to look at that article and have a discussion in small groups and work out some questions with regard to that, or we're going to look at the actual text, and there's questions at the end of the chapter that you may work on in class. And of course, I want to give a larger amount of time this week to actually completing assignments, so we make sure that everybody's up to date. Remember, from the first week of class, I told you that all the assignments for the first half of the quarter are due in week 6. Week 6 is next week, so I want to make sure we also have extra time for those of you that have been procrastinating. Remember, from strategies, what's procrastinating? Why do we do it? Stop doing it. So some of you need to stop procrastinating and get your assignments in, get them done, so that we can move on. And another thing about the assignments is when you do the assignments, they help in your learning and understanding and moving forward. So I hope everybody's having a wonderful afternoon, and I'm hoping that this works. So see you in the funny papers.